Welcome back to the Ponca City Monthly Podcast. I'm your host, Andy, and this week's going to be a little different. Tomorrow is Halloween, and so I wanted to share some stories or maybe something spooky for you this week. And what I did was I heard through the grapevine that sometimes the Ponca Tribe would have special storytelling sessions where they would get together for Halloween and tell stories around a campfire. And so I reached out to them to see if maybe they were doing that this year. And they said while they weren't, they would be happy to set up a time for me to come down and maybe talk to some folks and maybe get some spooky stories. And so I took the opportunity and I met Bruce Johnson, who had a very terrifying story of his personal experience on the White Eagle community grounds. Apparently the grounds themselves are haunted. So I thought it'd be fun to share his story with you. So I'm going to turn it over to Bruce and let him tell you all about his story. Thanks for joining us.
My name is Bruce Johnson. I'm enrolled Ponca member, Ponca Tribe, Oklahoma. I live here in the White Eagle community, and just want to share a story about spooky things. It's Halloween season, so I just came over to listen, but I guess I'm going to share now. But I live just right over here. I mean, directly to the west of where we are right now, and it's one of the not the oldest homes, but one of the older homes here in the community. And originally we moved here probably about almost 12 years ago now, in the house that we're living in. So we've been in there 12 years, and it was after within that first year moving there, we realized we weren't alone in the house. And so we had to ask around different ones. I knew different people who lived in that home about how it was, and they all said that they had some kind of encounters or something else. And so finally I got to one of the older tenants, and her name was Barbara Stumbling Bear. She was married to Stacy Bufflehead, and they lived in that home when it was first built way back in the day. And there's a great big oak tree in my front yard. And she said when they moved in, it was a small little tree. So, you know, it's, I guess, the beginning of that home. But she said that Stacy had told her that where the park is in the middle of the community, or the housing portion is, there used to be the old White Eagle Clinic, like a hospital of sorts or a meeting building or something, but they would see the people right there where the park is, where there's a big old green grassy area. There was a building there. And she said back in that day, they said there was probably just that, and then one other house that was here, and everybody else kind of lived down below the river in the Powell ground still. So she said, so that was, you know, the area of what it was before they built all these houses around the community up here on the top part here. So we were in our home, and then we'd always hear things, and things get kind of, you know, common, hate to say it, but the common haunting things would happen. We'd hear noises in the middle of the night and see things, and then we would hear them more than we ever seen them. It was after a while when we finally seen something in our house, and we had several people come over to our home trying to bless it. We even had my grandpa come over, and we had prayer meetings in our house just to try to ease the tension of whatever was going on in our home, and just trying to make it a good place, you know, to live and raise our family. But still, that whatever was there was a constant. It wouldn't go away. It died down for a little bit. But one night we were in the living room watching TV, and my third youngest son, he was asleep in the room, and he come out and he kept saying, something's bothering me in the room. It keeps moving, something in the room. So, you know, I got up and took him back to the room, put him back to bed, and then looked around. There was nothing. And I left his door open, And these houses are situated in a certain way where the living room and the kitchen are adjoining on the far end of the house, and there's just a long hallway through the middle of the house, and there's bedrooms, and then situated that way. But the hallway's pretty long, and I was sitting in a recliner, and I kept hearing whatever it was, and I kept watching the movie with my wife, and my brother had come over, and we was watching this movie, and then he's sitting there in a recliner to my right. My wife's sitting on the couch to the left, and I was sitting there kind of watching the hallway, because I thought, if something's bothering my son, he's going to come back pretty soon. And so I just kind of waited. And my brother's sitting there just relaxed, watching the show we're watching. And next he jumped up, and, he made a loud, response. And he kind of cussed. And he said, "What the F?" And jumped up, and he was swinging his arm back. And I was like, "What?" He said, "One of them boys came up and grabbed my arm." And because his arm was hanging off the recliner, I said, "Brother, there's nobody behind you." And he jumped up, looked around, and there's nobody there. And then it really shook him. And he goes, I don't know. He goes, "Man, I felt it." He said, "There's a little hand reached up and grabbed my arm, both hands, and just squeezed it." And he said, "It scared me." And he said, I said, "Well, there's nobody behind you." And then he looked down the hallway, kind of had to assure himself. And so he sat back down. We start watching this movie again, and then actually I could hear something down the hallway, and then I just had a bad feeling, and I didn't know what to think. I didn't want to look, because out of the corner of my eye I could see something down the hallway, and my kids at the time were all little bitty guys, and whatever was standing there was tall, and so I could just see it in my peripheral vision. I'm looking at it, I could see it, and it's just standing there. And then when I got the nerve enough just to look, I just slowly turned my head. I looked over, and there's this figure of a man standing there, and he is so tall that he's kind of like leaned forward at the end of the hallway, like his head is almost touching the ceiling. And he's leaning forward, and his arms are on both sides of the walls. And his hands were just very long and skinny. And it looked like he was wearing a black suit and a white shirt. And I jumped up, and I flipped on a light, and then he was gone. And I was like, I told my brother and my wife what I saw, and they were like, "Could you see what it looked like, its face?" I said, "I couldn't see a face. I couldn't see nothing." And so we kind of asked someone else to come over to our house, and then I guess the best way to say it is they burned cedar in our home, so they kind of like smudged our home. And so they burned cedar around the house, all through the house and everything, and I was telling them about what had happened. And the individuals that came to do this was Pete Buffalohead and his brother Jason Buffalohead, who's passed now. And these are the two boys that lived in that house when it was first built. And then they said that they've been at this house several times before to come and burn cedar and pray and do things. He said, because they said, even when we were little, we seen things. And I told him, I said, "Well, I seen something." And then Jason said, "Was he tall?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Was he wearing black clothes?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "How tall would he be if you describe him?" I said, "Man," he said, "like his head was hitting the roof." He said, "We've seen the same thing since when we were little kids." And he said, it was scary because he said, we were staying in the middle room in the back there. He said, and something came in that little room, and it grabbed our little brother Jarrett and pushed him against the wall. And he said it was a scary thing. So we ran outside. He said our mom was in the backyard, hanging clothes on a clothesline. We tried to tow her. And I said it was crazy because he knew exactly what I was describing before I even told him what I had seen and what I'd heard. And so he said, "Well, we hope this will help, help your home, and whatever it goes, it will go away." And it kind of quieted down, and it wasn't so bad after that, but still, it seems like anytime the changing of the seasons happens, spring to winter, something picks up, and it start picking back up again, and it start getting bad. So I called my brother Pete. I said, hey, it's kind of doing its thing again. And finally I had my uncle came from Norman to visit me, and my Uncle Floyd, he's a very sensitive person to things, and he can pick up on spirits, and he's been to my house several times before throughout the time. And I asked him that time, I said, hey, I said, he was on his way over, he got called, and I said, well, when he come over, I said, tell me, I said, have you ever sensed anything in my house, or heard anything, or picked up on there's spirits or something in the house? He goes, you know what, out of everybody's home ever been in, because I hear things everywhere I go, I hear something. He said, but in your home, he said, I've never heard nothing. He said, it's been super quiet, like it's beyond quiet, it's like eerie quiet. And so I was okay, good. And then I said, well, maybe it's just us, maybe it's just our imaginations or something. And then so he finally showed up, and I'm standing in the living room where the doorway is. Our doorway faces to the north, and he walks in, and he just stops in the middle of the doorway. He just looks at me, then he just starts looking up towards the ceiling, and I was like, okay. And then he walked back out, and he said, Bruce, come here. And I said, okay. So I walked out, and I said, what's the matter? He said, when I walked in, he said, there's a man standing behind you. He said, he's tall, he has big hands, long skinny hands. He said, he was standing behind you, and he said he wasn't touching you or anything, but he was standing over you to where it looked, foreboding, like he was trying to do something to you. He said, but he was super tall. And he said he's wearing a big black hat. He said rounded out top hat and he's crowned. He said, but you can't see his face. He said, but he got two long braids. He said, so he's an Indian man. He said, but I don't know who he is. He said, he won't say nothing. And I said, well, what is he wearing? He said, he's wearing a black suit, white shirt. He said, but he's super tall, slender person. And I said, that's the one we've been seeing in our home. And then, so he comes in, and then the whole entire time he's staring at where he's seen this person. This is the middle where the hallway begins in the living room. And he's kind of just talking to us, and every once in a while he looks up and he's looking over at him, and then finally he's staring at him again. I guess, we can't see him. He can see what this person's looking like. And then finally, it's just like this air movement through the house, just kind of, and then he goes, he left. I said, what did he say? He goes, he didn't say nothing. He said he just kept staring me down, and I kept talking, in my mind. He said, just saying to him, I said, you need to leave, my nephew and his family alone. He said, and he said finally he left. And he goes, after he did that, he said, you could hear things throughout the house again. He said, there's other people here, and he said, and it felt like these people were scared that this other entity in the home was there. And then he said, finally, a woman said, oh, good, he left. And he said she felt relieved the way she said it. And then he asked her, in Ponca, he asked her, who is he? And he goes, and there was, a long response. And finally, she had said, we don't know. And then, so he said, he goes, that's the first time I've ever heard anything in your home. He said, he's always kind of had a sense that there was something there. He said, because I can go anywhere in the world, anybody's home, and I hear things and see things. He said, and when I walk into your house, the years before, he said, it was like walking into a library. He said, it was so quiet, not any noise going on. And I said, yeah, it's something we've been dealing with for a long time. And he said, I don't know if he's gone forever or he's just gone for now. He said, I just kept telling him he need to leave. And So after that, we had a long period of it not being so scary in the house. And I don't know if it's something he said or he did, but it helped out our living situation there. And, you know, there's still little things that happen in our home, and things that, you know, normal things. We still see a lot of things. Our bedroom is in the northeast corner of the house, and one night I was going to bed, and again, it's around changing of the seasons of the year. It was actually this spring. I was laying in bed, and our bed is facing, you know, north to south, and then something walked through our wall and stopped and looked at me, and all I could make out was the size of what it was. It looked like static, you know, all like on a TV, the old TVs when they're left on, looked like static. It stopped, and you could see it turn towards me, and then just kept walking through our home. And my wife was coming to bed, and then she was coming out of the bathroom. The bathroom's right across from our doorway, so I figured any minute she's going to scream and see this thing, and then the two just kind of just like walked past each other. And I was like, oh good, something I seen, but she didn't see it, and I told her about what I saw. But there's still little things like that happen. And then when I finally talked to my uncle about the encounter again this year, I told him, he said, you got to remember, he said, White Eagle is a old community. He said, there's a lot of things that have happened there. He said, not knowing where everything was situated. He said, but whatever's in your home, he said, I don't think it's tied to the house. It's tied to the ground, that whatever it is, he said. And he said, so there's not knowing what these things are that, you know, haunt this world. And he said, but there's things that are scary, and they will make their selves known to us. And then I told him, I said, okay, good. And then next, you know, hung up, and then I'm still sitting in my chair. And then it was middle of the day, and I think it was a Saturday too, because I wasn't at work. It was at middle of the day. We had the windows open. And I looked down the hallway, and I kind of smiled. I was like, okay, good. Nothing bad's going to happen. Then out of the bathroom doorway, and it was just dark enough, I see this long hand just reach out, and it touched the wall, and then its little fingers kind of like tapped the wall, like it was. I was like, okay, you're not gone. And I was like, luckily, I mean, I think all the kids were outside or something, but. And it just shook me, and I was like, so whatever was there, or whatever's in our home has always been there. And we tell people before, you know, most of my family and everybody who knows us, they kind of know, you know, our house is haunted. And it's just something that's, you know, I guess really kind of tied to the ground or tied to the area of the community. And we don't know who the person is, and, you know, we've done a lot of things to try to appease the spirit or the entity of whatever these things are, and but still it's not really gone away. It's just something we deal with. You know, it's kind of like, you know, the running joke of where we got, you know, extra person who lives in our home with us, and a lot of people, nephews and nieces that know our home pretty well. I always tell them, I say, well, you want to come by? We'll watch a scary movie at the house. They're like, no, we don't want to go to your house and watch any scary movies, you know. And that's what we always joke around too about at my house. I was like, when the new scary movie comes out, let's go to the house and watch it. And nope, we're not watching those kind of movies at your home. I said, yeah. I said, to the point where we don't really watch those kind of, I said, because, you know, our grandma's always told us, what you watch, even in movies, can bring things into your home. And so we're always very cautious about doing those kind of things. But it's just kind of what this community is. It's full of spirits that are here, good and bad, I guess. And they're tied to more than just these homes. They're tied to the community itself. And there's people who have encounters all over. But for some reason, we were even told that we were the longest living occupants of this house. And other people who have lived in there, I talked to another relative of ours, Donna Poor. She lived there, and she said, I don't think we lived there more than 3 years. She said we could not deal with whatever was in that house. And even Barbara, She said, we probably lived maybe 4 or 5 years in that home. And she said, we just had to leave. She said it was something that was constant. There was always something. You'd hear something gets moved. And she said, whatever it is, it likes the middle room, the middle bedroom. I said, yeah. I told her, whenever something goes missing, we tell the kids, it's in the middle room closet. And it is. It's always.
How long have you been there now?
12 years.
That's how long I lived in this other house, one of those homes.
Yeah.
12 years.
About 12 years now.